Shadow of the Erdtree finally answered a number of questions surrounding Elden Ring's lore, but in classic FromSoft fashion, it also gave us many more mysteries in exchange, and there's one that feels especially curious. This building. It's clearly an important building. It was shown in the gameplay trailer, the story trailer, and can be seen across the entirety of the Land of Shadow, even making up a central part of the first impression of the region. The tallest structure in the land, looming even slightly above the Divine Gate of Inir Ilim, it towers over your entire journey over to the Shadowkeep. After wondering about it from the trailers, after finally working out the back passage to reach it, and then beating the infamous Gaius, we walked up to it, and then through it, and almost as if to emphasize its lack of lore, a new area text appeared and said, Scadutree Chalice. This bowl got its own area title, and even a unique named icon on the map, but the absolutely enormous, iconic structure right in front of it got nothing. What is it? What does it do? Why is it so thin? What's the shape at the top for? If you're like us, then it was a pretty frustrating moment lore-wise, even if the 5 fragments were a welcome reward. Sadly, the rest of the DLC sheds no further light on the structure. No item references it, no dialogue, no painting. So naturally, we then spent far too much time diving into everything else. The environmental design, architecture, surrounding lore, and so on. And we may just have found not only an answer to what this mysterious building is, but also that it points to a now hidden alliance of Messmer from before the Crusade. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss upcoming Elden Ring and Souls lore. To help frame our thoughts going forward, let's start with some theories for what this tower could be, highlighting what aspects of these theories do and don't make sense currently, before we dive into the detailed lore from the ground up. One theory stems from the natural impression of the tower. From most angles, including the shots from the trailers, the top of the tower beautifully frames a golden trail softly falling from the tree. In reality, it's the chalice behind that once caught the falling sap, so it follows that the tower served as a symbol for all to see, a symbol of the tree's bounty spread across the land entire. However, this doesn't explain everything. If the tower served as a symbol, why is the Shadowkeep located so close as to half obscure it? Not to mention that the keep even blocks access to it, with some walls that have no purpose other than to section off the area. Then there's the station of Gaius, who was both Messmer's friend and the leader of his men. Why would he and the Albinauric woman stay at a destroyed shack, unless Gaius acts under strict orders? There are also some timeline confusions with the theory, but suffice to say, there are still questions here. A second theory is that the tower served as some form of brace for the tree, a concept that was carried out for the Halig tree, where Elphael served as a support system. After all, Miquella often took inspiration from what came before. Perhaps this tower too at one point aided the tree. Given the Land of Shadow's connection to the Age of the Crucible, there may have at one point been many different trunks all vying for a spot in the sun, and this tower served to prop up one of them. Or it could have been to support the leaning tree. Naturally, this theory has some issues too. Though clearly well built, it seems unlikely that a structure built for support would be this tall and yet have such a narrow base, as surely the force it could support would be limited. Its positioning is also odd, where often braces try to counterbalance the leaning tree by pulling from the opposite side, or like Elphael by completely encircling the trunk. A third possible theory is that the tower was in fact a triumphal arch. Triumphal arches are freestanding monumental structures in the shape of an archway with one or more arched passageways that typically stand alone, unconnected to other buildings. Originating from the Roman Empire, these arches served to commemorate victorious generals or significant public events such as the founding of new colonies, or the accession of a new emperor. The names of the types of arch can vary based on the reason they were built, but the overall pattern is clear. And it is true that if we ignore the fantasy design of the tower, it does bear a clear resemblance to many of these arches across the world. The triple arch triumphant monument of Orange in particular resonates with the tower's design. This theory would suggest the tower stood as a monument after some great military victory or royal development or otherwise. However, the theory is again hurt by the Shadowkeep being so close, diminishing the marvel. Also, while these structures are meant to stand alone to better symbolize triumph, historically they were designed to span a road, and to be passed through, not around. But the tower in Elden Ring seems to have no road or even a path leading up to it, and one can also just walk around it, made even more strange by the nearby enormous ramparts that section off the area, and completely undermine the triumphal design. There's a number of other theories to speculate on. Could the tower be some sort of gate with a portal at the top that took inspiration from the Divine Gate? Is there a relation to the Divine Towers? Might it be to do with communion with an outer god? What if it predated the nearby tree? With so little information, the possibilities are endless, so let us know what your thoughts are down below. All of these theories could be true, but at the risk of getting lost in speculation, let's review what we know, focusing on details that feel out of place. The tower is the closest structure to the Scadutree. It is unnamed and lacks any reference in-game, ironically overshadowed by the Scadutree Chalice. However, it is clearly important, not just within the world given its stature, but also in development from its prominent exposure in the trailers. Located nearby is the Shadowkeep, whose finish resembles that of the tower. The keep's size, though technically not as tall, for the most part obscures the marvel of the tower, and more than that, it blocks access to it. To reach the Shadow View, the Tarnished has to enter the keep through the church district at the back, head to the loft of the Specimen Storehouse, navigate across the wooden rafters, take 2 lifts joined by this temporary wooden walkway all the way to the base of the keep, and then defeat Commander Gaius. Strangely, strewn across the entirety of the commander's courtyard are the remains of Banished Knights and some gladiator weapons. Nowhere else in the realm of shadow are these found. And then, just before the tower, is a broken Albinauric shack. This isn't a small list of interesting details, and yet it's still tough to discern what it all means. So, we looked closer. The tower features some interesting detailing. There are these flame-like stands at the bottom, the distinctive triple arch partway up, and the semicircle at the top. And then there are these pointed arches made of a number of columns, followed by some elaborate stone tracery, 2 circular shapes which oddly reminded us of the curse blades. And most distinctive of all, at the top of this there is ornamental detailing of 4-leafed flowers. What's curious is that the tower actually shares very little of this architecture with the Shadowkeep, despite their similar first impressions. The triple arches or the semicircle are not found anywhere, and the flame stands are only seen, curiously, surrounding the main gate plaza and the statue of Marika. The church district has some 4-leaf detailing, but it's too distinct to be connected. There is only one building in the entire Shadowkeep that shares the arch and flower detailing of the tower, the Specimen Storehouse. And with this in mind, take a look at the architecture of the Shadowkeep as a whole. While at first the tower and the entire keep seem to be entirely cohesive, look at the shapes on display. The Specimen Storehouse features pointed arches, ornate detailing, and flying buttresses. It appears Gothic in inspiration. Meanwhile, the rest of the keep, though there's still some Gothic inspiration, is much closer to the architecture seen in medieval Europe. The brickwork is not so ornate, and the shapes use larger angles. There are battlements, curtain walls and towers, a fortified gatehouse, and the term keep is most commonly associated with this period of history. There are 2 distinct styles within the Shadowkeep. The outer walls, church district, and Messmer's tower are all medieval European, and the storehouse and nameless tower are Gothic. This is why the detailing on the tower is only found on the storehouse, and this is the first clue to its history. The second clue lies on a sigil that is found all over the medieval walls, but not on the Gothic sections of the keep. This sigil is littered across the realm of shadow to mark the conquest of Messmer's crusade, and is also featured on the floor of Messmer's room. His black armour describes the symbol as his crest, but look at the sigil that appears within the incantations derived from Messmer's flame. This one is different, showing only a clean symbol of his undulating flame. If the former design was truly Messmer's own crest, why would the incantations not show the same? This incantation sigil, purely of Messmer's fire, makes only a part of the crest shown throughout the Realm of Shadow and the Shadow Keep. Instead, the crest denotes a circular boundary, split in the middle by a spiraling arrow shape. On the left is Messmer's sigil, and symmetrically arranged on the right is a circular, helical spiral of a similar size. Both symbols are clearly of equal importance, and they are bound together somehow. There's a practice that became standardized during the 14th and 15th centuries in Europe, particularly in England, Scotland and France, that is called impalement. Impalement is a heraldic term that refers to the practice of combining two coats of arms side by side within a shield. The technique is a symbolic and practical way to represent relationships, alliances, and multiple inheritances within a single shield, and highlights the unity and shared identity of the factions involved, while still maintaining the distinctiveness of each coat of arms. I propose that this crest of Messmer, that frames two distinct sigils within one border, is a product of heraldic impalement, and once symbolized the union of Messmer with another. The question is who? The exact design of the circular spiral is unique to the crest, but let's pick it apart. We've previously talked on the channel about the relevance of the spiral design in Elden Ring, and in Shadow of the Erdtree its importance has been made clear. The spiral is a normalized crucible current that one day will form a column that stretches to the gods. Spirals relate to the power of the crucible and the path to divinity, and this technique was deeply venerated by none other than the Hornsent. The spiral and their attempts to reach the gods pervade every aspect of their society. For their incantations, their architecture, and everything in between, the spiral is a core aspect of their culture. However, it's more than speculative at this point to connect Messmer's crest to the Hornsent. Messmer led the crusade against the Hornsent after all, burning most of their inhabitants to spirits, and left their civilization broken and sealed away. Right? Well, what about before the crusade? The timeline of the Land of Shadow is something for another video, though we are very excited to dive into it. But suffice to say that the rise of the Erdtree and Marika was separate to the crusade of Messmer, and there was a long period between the two. A story told time and again by the land, since everything within the Land of Shadow, save for Miquella and his followers, was there before the realm was sealed away. If Miquella, a powerful Empyrean, struggled this much to reach the Veiled Land, then surely it would be all but impossible for everyone else. Thus, what is found in the Shadow Realm can serve to date what already existed before the veiling. The furnace golems feature firehead decorations, a tactic to spread fear that is used elsewhere, and that dates them post the war against the fire giants. Commander Gaius and Messmer both were as elder brothers to the lion Radahn, who was born after the Liurnian Wars. Gaius also trained with Radahn, immediately after which was the Star Scourge conflict. Messmer knows about the Tarnished and their lack of grace, an event from the end of Godfrey's age. There's tons of items that hail from the Erdtree Empire throughout the land, such as the various amber medallions of the largest variety, the Talisman of Lord's Bestowal, or the dueling shield, which was once used in ritual combat performed to honour the Erdtree, a custom that had somehow remained within the Realm of Shadow. Not to mention the presence of enemies like royal revenants, ulcerated tree spirits, omen killers, death knights, and beyond, whose associated history all date well into the reign of Marika. So there was a substantial period between the birth of the Erdtree and the veiling of the Land of Shadow, and I argued that the Erdtree and Hornsent were in fact friendly during this time. Now, at first this feels impossible. Marika's people, the shaman, were horribly mistreated by the Hornsent. She clearly held them in contempt in later years when she ordered Messmer's crusade. Plus, why would the Hornsent support one of their shamans rising in power to found an empire of their own that might threaten the Hornsent rule? All these are valid questions, but the exact nature of Marika's rise to power is currently still difficult to parse. Whether Marika's rise was sanctioned or not, who the seduction and the betrayal mentioned in the story trailer was in reference to. All that will have to wait for another time to properly dive into the Hornsent culture, but for now what's important is whether there was an alliance, not how it arose. And once again, the evidence for the union of the Erdtree and Hornsent civilizations is everywhere. First is the amount of shared features between each culture. If Marika grew up as a shaman, she would be well aware what the spiral meant. It's prominently featured on the jars after all. And yet, if we look at the Erdtree civilization, up until the consolidation of the Golden Order proper with fundamentalism, the spiral is everywhere. In sigils, on the armour of Leyendel's soldiers, even in hair. And then, everything from the Golden Order proper onwards does away with the spiral completely, and this is no longer found. For example, Radahn when he is young, when he trained with Messmer and Gaius and the Land of Shadow was not yet veiled, has a braid, but later in his life he loses it. Similarly, Marika's statues within the Land of Shadow shows her wearing a spiral waistband that is no longer shown in the lands between. The Erdtree sigil contains spirals at every stage until Golden Order fundamentalism. There's stone tablets that likely contain the Hornsent notes on the ancient ruins of Rauh found in Marika's bedchamber. Grafting is found in both cultures, as is the focus on the growth of trees and the melding of flesh to aid their growth. The list goes on, but for me the clearest sign that Marika and the Erdtree were once allied to the Hornsent is the sense of betrayal the Hornsent feel to this day.
Your kind are not forgiven. The Erdtree is my people's enemy. By Marika long betrayed, set aflame.
It can't be a betrayal if they were never friendly to begin with, and the sentiment feels far too strong for if this was only because Marika was a shaman. The Imperium Grandam illustrates this further.
Listen, progeny of the wanton's trumpet. For thy sins thou shalt have thy recompense.
A strumpet means a prostitute or promiscuous woman, but wanton means either deliberate and unprovoked, or sexually unrestrained. So the phrase wanton strumpet is a repetition. It's a tautology of an already very loaded sentiment, which I think illustrates the level of personal resentment the Grandam feels towards Marika. One could even speculate, given her name Imperium Grandam, that she may have been closely involved with Marika's upbringing in some manner. Nonetheless, the image painted here is not just a cruel tyrant who exterminated an entire race, but one who betrayed a civilization that trusted her. Take vengeance upon Messmer and his lot. They who betrayed us, aye, they who burned us. Let them face in thy wrath their just deserts. So, the Erdtree and the Hornsent were once allied, and Messmer's crest depicts his sigil next to a spiral circular one that suggests an alliance. This alliance built the medieval part of the Shadow Keep, which is decorated all over with the crest. But what about the Specimen Storehouse? I could only find the odd place with Messmer's crest, such as this fireplace Freya studies by. But on closer inspection, this is clearly a later addition to the building, jutting out as a separate block from the wall. Otherwise, the lack of crests is quite a strange contrast to the rest of the keep, and the only ones to be found are hidden right at the top of the tower. On the wooden rafters, near the cogs powering the central rotating mechanism, the spiral circular sigil can be found. Just this symbol, with no sign of Messmer's. Not only does this confirm that this was once its own design, and that Messmer's crest is a product of heraldic impalement, but it may hint that this tower was made by this spiral circle faction. There are even rugs with very similar designs to Messmer's flag, except they don't feature his crest. Instead, there are only spiral patterns and the spiral arrow. So, if this spiral faction has ties to the Hornsent, does the architecture of the storehouse share any features with Ballarat or Anir Elim? For the most part, there is no clear repeated brickwork, reliefs, or general motifs, and the architecture is entirely different. However, though this is speculative of course, and I encourage you to come to your own conclusions, take a look at this repeating design found in both Ballarat and Anir Elim. They are decently worn down, but consist of a repeating circular linking trail with flourishes back and forth to fill the space. Now look at this design in the storehouse. While definitely not an exact match, they do share a remarkably similar pattern. Even the relative proportions of the flourishes back and forth match. This new design is more detailed and depicts vines or branches flowing back and forth, with leaves facing forwards and what look like bunches of grapes facing back. Even if this stonework was aged, it would never look the same as what is found in the Land of the Tower, but I think they're too similar to be mere coincidence. Similarly, look at the spiral pattern on this lift in Anira limb. Again, the design differs to the circular spiral sigil, but it is also difficult to ignore the similarities. All this makes me think that the storehouse designs do stem from the same place, but they evolved many years later. Nonetheless, take a look at the interior of the storehouse. Like the Shadowkeep, the first impression is pretty cohesive. A busy place full to the brim with tablets, bodies, and scrolls. However, on looking closely, does all this academia fit the original building? Look at the bookshelves, the walkways, the outdoor sections. Recall what it's like to explore the storehouse. It's confusing and unclear. This roof covers the intricate stonework we've just been looking at. It's clear that the storehouse interior has been completely updated at some point to better serve its new purpose. Similarly, perhaps the exterior was updated with winged snake statues to represent the new management. The lore surrounding Messmer's Fire Knights confirms this timeline, who only partway through the Crusade chose to rise above the barbarism of their orders. Salza, a sage of the Fire Knights, burned more villages and scorched more land than any other. Then he refused to burn down an old ruin, at the risk of his own life. The ruins in question were of course the ruins of Rauh, whose flora remains lush despite the Crusade clearly sweeping through the region. Salza convinced others, such as Hilda, who joined those who urged that the specimens be preserved. Therefore, it was late into the Crusade that the central tower of the keep was adapted and became the Specimen Storehouse. Bodies and tablets from the ruins were taken to be stored and studied, and the Fire Knights movement preserved an incredible resource from what could be the most ancient civilization of the lands between. I don't believe the storehouse could have been built after the rest of the Shadowkeep, given it serves as the central hub, joining to the Shadowview and the Hinterlands, to Messmer's chamber and to the Rauh ruins. Though Gothic architecture is typically a later development than European medieval architecture, their respective periods of use overlapped, and in Elden Ring's world it is clear that complex stonework was possible at a far earlier era, shown by the Land of the Tower. So, the Alliance of Messmer is related to the Hornsent in some way. This faction was likely the original inhabitant of the now Specimen Storehouse. The Hornsent were once allied to the Erdtree, which explains how Messmer ended up allied to a Hornsent-adjacent faction in turn. And then, famously, the Hornsent were betrayed by Marika and Messmer. So, if we are right so far, that means Messmer must have betrayed his alliance too. And such a story is actually depicted throughout the keep. There are black spirits all over, burnt by Messmer's flame, who do not have horns. There are boats set aflame, decorated with spiral infinity symbols, that once belonged to the Tibia Mariners. The Tibia Mariner in Kara's hidden grave summons a royal revenant, which neatly illustrates that they were once on good terms with the Erdtree faction before this betrayal. And if you stand close to the burning boats in the Shadowkeep, you can hear this unique sound, which to me suggests that it's a relatively recent affair, and the spirits continue to suffer. But most striking of all is a mass slaughter hidden behind the keep, away from prying eyes where we fight Gaius. The remains of an entire army of Banished Knights. Knights which otherwise are not seen once in the entirety of the Realm of Shadow. In the lands between, the Banished Knights serve as mercenaries across the entire realm. They feature in Stormvale, the mountaintops, Farum Azula, Caelid, even the capital, not to mention the various battlegrounds their remains are found in. So it feels odd to me that the only Banished Knights in the Land of Shadow are all together in one very densely packed location. To me, the stark contrast to the impression of the knights in the base game illustrates one clear thing. While those in the lands between serve as independent mercenaries, the Banished Knights behind the Shadowkeep made up an organised army. The Banished Knights have more in common with the Hornsent than you might realise. Before the DLC, they seemed to take inspiration from dragons. However, we now know that the ancient dragons incited the active dragon communion across the realm, and the Banished Knights as established mercenaries were just quick on the uptake. This is why it's the standard form of the helm that has the red scarf, where it's the altered, updated helm that features the dragon. Looking at this armor piece and this horn on the shoulder, what if instead it relates to the Hornsent? If we look at their commander's armor, the dragon motif is no longer present, but the horns are much more prominent. Not to mention, the power of the Banished Knights, and especially the commanders, relates to the storm, just like the Hornsent. Wind, ice, and lightning. And there's a number of peripheral details at Banished Knight locales that together point to the Hornsent. The lion reliefs found at Stormvale and the Fortified Manor may link to the lion worship of the Hornsent. It's at the Fortified Manor that there is finally another iteration of the spiral circle sigil in Messmer's Crest and the Specimen Storehouse, right there on the round table, encircling the Erdtree and Crucible sigil. There are differences, such as the line through the middle of the spiral, and the repeated pattern is also closer to the design in Anira Limb than the Storehouse, but it's the closest match we could find. The sigil on the cape of the Banished Knight commanders is also interesting for having a spiky circular design that could have evolved with the spiral Hornsent influence. Finally, deep within the Shadowkeep, there's a unique door that actually depicts the World Tree relief that precedes the latest Erdtree depiction. The same design that is found at Stormvale, the Fortified Manor, Redmane Castle, and so on, which all have history tied to the Banished Knights. While each piece of evidence is hard to make any conclusions with, when taken together, everything starts to paint a clearer picture. So, my proposal is that the Banished Knights were part of the original faction who inhabited the Storehouse, a faction that derived from the Hornsent, and that may have even included the Tibia Mariners. There's a lot of interesting details that are shared between the depiction of the Helfen and the Storehouse, even without the Tibia Mariner boats, whose themes are clearly integral to the Land of Shadow. However, there's also a lot that doesn't add up too, such as the top of the structure, but I think it's worth mentioning. It feels natural that an army with ties to the Hornsent and to Godfrey was set up with Messmer during their alliance. The army was allied to Messmer for a time, and then, all at once, they were betrayed. This is why there are no others across the Land of Shadow. They were ordered to group together. It was a cold, calculated roundup and execution of an army filled with trust. And with that lens, listen to the story told by the faction's history. Knights who, whether by misfortune or misdeed, were forced to abandon their homes. Commander Neil, veteran of Castle Sol, offered this prosthesis in exchange for the lives of defeated knights held prisoner. He went on to lead these men as an army of no nation. Neil was a lone survivor who commanded spirits to defend his long-past master. The hefty furnace pot is created using embers of Messmer, and its flame burns away both body and soul. When impurity is thus expunged, one calls it cleansing. This is why the victims of Messmer are not only left as spirits, but as blackened spirits, burnt in soul as well as body. It would seem that Neil managed to spare the complete burning of the Banished Knight souls through his bartering. The Shadow View, once a place of importance worth naming despite its small size, became a reminder of the breakdown of Messmer's alliance. The doors leading to the lift down were locked, never to open again. And Gaius, a commander of Messmer's army, was stationed to guard the area. It's definitely interesting that the lifts leading down to the hidden exit were made by the Banished Knight faction, not Messmer, and feature the spiral's sigil. In time, the Scadutree splintered, and its fragments were strewn across the land. The shadow covered the realm, falling most heavily on the Shadowkeep. Black iron ornamented with gold, a rotten odour stubbornly clings to it. Perhaps it arises from the tainted nature of the blood that splattered upon it, or perhaps it is the wearer's own blackened soul, festering after endless slaughter. I think the castle may not have always been such a deep black, and it was the falling Scadutree flakes that made all the buildings appear so similar, despite the distinct styles. Areas of the keep not exposed to the staining fall show a wider spectrum of colour and texture, but the outdoor finish has over time been painted with the black of the Scadutree. Okay, let's finally return to our mystery tower. Where does all this leave us? Taking everything we've looked at into account, we think the tower once served as a triumphal arch, or rather an honorary arch, for it was not to celebrate a military victory, but instead the rise of the Erdtree and its positive influence across the land. Its design once encouraged the population to walk beneath it when seeking blessings, something that was once very common. The Age of Plenty. And this was even carried out by Marika for a time, depicted by the Erdtree Favor's talisman. Often, actual Roman triumphal arches were initially built in wood and other rather temporary materials, only later to be replaced by one in stone. Something that may even provide further links to the Messmer Alliance, given the focus on woodwork within the Specimen Storehouse, particularly in the rafters which feature the circular spiral design. This is why the tower and the Shadow Keep could be built so close. Part of its purpose was to illustrate the good terms between each faction. I think this is why the tower features the unique flame stonework at the base. It serves as a symbol of the union with Messmer, for on the spears of Messmer found throughout the realm, that feature his heraldic crest at the top, are found the same flame styling. This might be why the only other place they are found is surrounding the public depiction of Marika in the keep, the ultimate symbol of the Erdtree who Messmer serves. The rise of the Erdtree and its bounty shared across the land was symbolised by the framing of its falling sap. The Lord accepted the sap stoically, without any signs of wavering. No Underlord of the Erdtree casts a long shadow over the lands. The building's height ensured it was seen by as many eyes as possible, but this was all it was for. And so, after the Age of Plenty passed, and after Marika and Messmer betrayed the Hornsent, the tower no longer served any purpose. The fact that the tower was included in the Veiling of the Realm further illustrates this. The tower's once kind message slowly faded from memory, until there remained no reference to it at all. Now there are no more blessings, and instead the people of the Erdtree collect the splinters of the Scadutree and use them in prayer. If you made it this far, consider supporting the channel and get early access to upcoming releases, feature your own theories on the channel, or even get access to new Lore Before Bed videos ad-free for less than $1. Your support makes content like this possible, so thank you.